She was born to serve the river, never to love a man. But when Ekemma gave her heart to a fisherman, the river turned to blood. And to save the village, the gods demanded her life. In a certain village, far beyond the noise of the modern world, there was a river. But this was no ordinary river. The elders called it Mirindu, the water of life. It wasn't just where the villagers fetch water to drink or cook. It was their god, their protector, their pride. From the day the village was born, the river had been there, silent, wide, and deep. The way it flowed, it was as if the river itself was breathing. And the people treated it with fear and respect. You could not bathe inside without greeting it. You could not spit inside, unless you wanted your stomach to swell like a drum. No child dared throw stone into it, unless you wanted to hear voices calling your name at night. The elders would say, "This river sees, this river hears, this river remembers." Long ago, before even our fathers were born, strange children began to appear in the village. Some babies were born with tiny beads around their ankles, others with a faint silver mark on their foreheads. They said these children came from the river itself, sent by the gods who lived inside. And these river children, they were special. Their families became rich. Farms overflowed. Goats gave birth to twins, sometimes triplets. Even sickness avoided their compound. Because of this, it became a common thing. Whenever a baby was born, the elders would take the child to the river priest to ask, "Is this child from the river or from men?" If the gods claimed the child, the family danced. If not, life went on as usual. For many years, the village prospered. No war, no hunger, no great sickness. The people and the river, they lived like husband and wife. Until one season, the season Ekemma came. Ekemma. Even her name was like music. She was born in the season of heavy rains. That night, the thunder roared without stopping. The midwife swore the wind was whispering her name even before she took her first breath. Her cry was soft, almost like a song. Her skin glistened like water under sunlight. Her eyes were not like ours. They were deep, almost as if they held the reflection of the river itself. When the elders carried her to the river priest, something strange happened. The water in the calabash began to swirl on its own, forming little waves. The priest's eyes rolled back. His voice deepened, but it was not his voice anymore. The spirit of the river spoke through him. "This one is mine. She is married to me. Through her, our family will never lack. But she must never love a man of the earth. For her heart belongs only to the river." From that day, Ekemma's life was no longer her own. She grew up knowing she was different. She did not fetch water with the other girls, her water was always brought to her. She did not pound yam during festivals, instead, she was dressed in white and taken to the river bank, where the priest would offer kola and sing chants to the gods. The villagers adored her. Not just for her beauty, but for the blessings she brought. Her father's farm became the largest in the land. Her mother's trading business tripled. Her brothers built fine houses. But, my children, blessings from the gods always come with a price. As Ekemma grew older, she began to notice the invisible chain around her life. She could not attend dances in the moonlight. She could not walk alone in the forest without the priest's permission. She could not, and this one pained her the most. She could not fall in love. The elders reminded her, "Your husband is the river. The gods chose you. Do not let your eyes wander to the sons of men." She nodded, she obeyed, but inside her heart, she wondered. How can my heart belong to water, when I am made of flesh and blood? One Harmattan morning, she stood at the riverbank, the mist curling around her ankles like a lover's touch. She stared into the water, half expecting the face of her so-called river husband to appear. But all she saw was herself, and a faint shadow moving in the distance. It was a fisherman. He was young, strong, with skin kissed by the sun and eyes that carried the calm of deep water. He was humming a tune as he drew his net. And when he saw her, he paused, just as she did. The world seemed to fall silent. The wind stopped. Even the river stilled. Ekemma felt something stir in her chest, something the river could never give her. And though no words passed between them that day, the seed had been planted. The elders say the river is jealous. It does not like to share what belongs to it. And from the moment that fisherman's eyes met Ekemma's, the river began to watch. It watched when she lingered longer at the riverbank. It watched when she smiled a little too brightly whenever the fisherman passed. It watched, and it waited. Because the gods, my children, are patient when they are angry. That season, the moon shone redder than usual. The crickets were quieter. The night air felt heavier. The old women whispered that the river was restless. But the young ones, they only laughed and continued their play. Little did they know, the river had already chosen its punishment. Ekemma's story was only beginning, but already, the river had begun to breathe differently. The breath that once brought life was starting to taste of death. The day the fisherman's eyes met Ekemma's for the first time, something shifted inside her. It was a feeling she had never known, warm, heavy, and alive. She tried to brush it away, but his face followed her into her dreams. Ekemma had grown into a young woman whose beauty drew both admiration and caution. Her skin seemed to hold the glow of dawn, her hair fell in long dark waves, and her eyes, deep, quiet pools that seemed to know more than they should. When she walked through the village, people stopped mid-step. They lowered their voices, not because she was unapproachable, but because she was sacred. The elders never allowed her to forget it. They reminded her at every gathering, every ritual, every celebration. You are not like others. You belong to the river. You are the wife of the spirit who dwells beneath the water. It was a destiny she had never chosen. But destiny rarely asks for permission. One quiet morning, Ekemma went to the river before the rest of the village stirred. The mist clung to the surface like a white veil. The air was damp and cool, and the water moved in slow, lazy ripples. She walked along the bank, barefoot, her white wrapper brushing the tips of the grass. And then she saw him again. The fisherman. He was untangling his net on the far side, his bare shoulders glistening with the spray of the river. His movements were unhurried, yet purposeful, as though he belonged there in a way even the river could not question. Ekemma slowed her steps. Her heart was not beating the way it should. He looked up. Their eyes met. And this time, he didn't look away. Days passed. Sometimes, she saw him by chance while drawing flowers near the water. Sometimes, she caught him glancing her way as he carried baskets of fish to the village market. It was always brief, always wordless. But each time, the connection deepened. Until one afternoon, when chance was no longer enough. The sun was sinking low, turning the water gold, when the fisherman walked over to her. "You're Ekemma," he said. His voice was steady, but there was a question in it, as though he wanted her to confirm what he already knew. She nodded. "And you?" "Obi." The name felt familiar on her tongue, though she had never spoken it before. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They just stood by the river, listening to the soft rush of water against the bank. Finally, he said, "I have heard about you." Ekemma tilted her head slightly. "What have you heard?" "That you are married to the river. That no man can claim your heart." A faint smile touched her lips. "And yet you stand here." He met her gaze, unflinching. "And yet I stand here." They began to meet often after that. Sometimes in the early morning mist. Sometimes when the moon was just a thin sliver in the sky. They spoke about simple things at first, the weather, the river, the village. But slowly, their conversation slipped into deeper waters. He told her about his dreams of traveling beyond the hills, of seeing places where the land met the endless sea. She told him about the loneliness that came with being chosen by the gods. Obi listened without judgment, and when he spoke, his words felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. It was during one of these quiet meetings that Obi's fingers brushed against hers. It was a small thing, an accident perhaps. But for Ekemma, it was like touching fire. That night, she could not sleep. Her mind replayed the sound of his voice, the way his eyes seemed to hold hers as if they could see past the surface and into her very soul. The elders, of course, noticed her distraction. "You have been restless," one of them said during a ritual. "Guard your heart, child. The river does not share." Ekemma nodded, but inside, she felt something shifting. For years, she had obeyed without question. Now, for the first time, she wanted to disobey. One evening, they met under the old palm tree at the edge of the river. The air was heavy and still, and the faint sound of water moving over stones filled the silence between them. "I think of you every day," Obi said quietly. Ekemma's heart quickened. "And I of you." He stepped closer. "They say you belong to the river. But I don't believe the river loves you the way I do." Her breath caught. Obi's words felt dangerous, like a stone dropped into still water. She looked away toward the river. The surface was calm, but she thought she saw the faintest ripple moving against the current. Over the next weeks, the changes began. At first, they were small. The fish in the nets became fewer. The river's usual clear surface sometimes turned cloudy. A few elders whispered that the gods were watching, though no one spoke openly of it. Ekemma tried to ignore the signs. She wanted to believe love could exist without consequence. But deep inside, a quiet unease began to grow. Then came the night when they stood again by the water's edge. The moonlight touched the river like silver, and their reflections moved together on its surface. "If we are to be together," Obi said, "then let it be without fear. I will not hide my love for you." Her pulse raced. "You know what the elders will say. You know what the river will do." "I know," he said. "But I also know that if I have to live without you, then my life will mean nothing." She searched his face for doubt, but found none. And in that moment, she felt something inside her break free from the chains the river had wrapped around her. "Then I promise," she said. "No matter what comes, we will face it together." It was a promise made under the gaze of the gods. A promise the river had heard. And the river never forgets. The promise had been made. A promise whispered under the moonlight, with the river as witness. And from that night, the air in the village began to change. It was not sudden. At first, the signs were small, the kind you could ignore if you wanted to believe nothing was wrong. The fish grew scarce. The water sometimes carried a strange taste, bitter and metallic. Children who once played freely along the banks now kept their distance, uneasy without knowing why. The elders noticed. They always noticed. And though they said little at first, their eyes carried the weight of unspoken fear. One morning, before sunrise, Ekemma walked to the river. The mist hung low over the water. But when she reached the edge, her steps faltered. The river was not clear. Its surface was tinted dark red. It was faint at first, like the last light of evening sun, but the longer she looked, the stronger it became. The reflection of the sky was gone. The water looked like it had been dyed with blood. Her breath caught. The old stories rushed back to her. Her grandmother's voice in her memory. When the river turns red, it is angry. And when it is angry, it takes until it is satisfied. She knelt at the edge, dipping her fingers into the water. It was still cool to the touch, still flowing, but the red stain clung to her skin like a warning. By midday, word had spread. People gathered at the riverbank, murmuring in low, tense voices. The elders stood apart, speaking in quick, urgent tones. And by evening, the first villager fell ill. It began with fever, hot enough to burn the skin. Then came weakness. The body would not obey. The eyes turned crimson at the edges. No herb or root worked against it. 3 people died in the first week. 2 more the week after. The village grew quieter. The laughter of children disappeared. The market stalls closed early. Fear had moved in like an unwanted guest. Ekemma tried to stay hidden, to keep her mind from drifting toward guilt. But she could not ignore the truth. Since the night she promised herself to Obi, the river had been watching. And now it was punishing. She thought of ending it, walking away from him before things grew worse. But when Obi came to her, taking her hands in his, the thought dissolved like salt in water. His presence was the only warmth left in her world. "We will survive this," he told her. "The sickness will pass." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe the river's anger would fade. But deep down, she knew better. The council of elders called for a gathering. Men, women, and children came together in the central square, their faces drawn and anxious. The oldest priest, his voice heavy with age and authority, stepped forward. "We have angered the river," he said. "It no longer blesses us. It no longer feeds us. It sends sickness instead of health. We must find the cause and make it right." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some whispered of forgotten sacrifices. Others spoke of broken taboos. But when the priest raised his hand for silence, his next words froze Ekemma in place. "The gods have spoken. The cause is among us. One has broken the sacred bond between the river and the people." His gaze swept the crowd, slow and deliberate. It landed on her. The villagers followed his eyes. The silence grew heavy. A single truth passed between them without being spoken aloud. "Ekemma," the priest continued, his voice now sharp. "The gods chose her from birth. She was to remain pure, married only to the river. But she has given her heart to a man of the earth. And for this, we are all paying the price." A wave of murmuring rose from the crowd. Some faces were full of anger, others pity. But all were afraid. Obi stepped forward. "This is not her fault," he said firmly. "If you want to blame someone, blame me." But the priest shook his head. "You were only a temptation. She was the one who vowed herself to the river. She broke the vow. And now, the river demands balance." That night, the elders performed a ritual at the water's edge. They lit palm oil lamps and laid white cloth on the ground. They poured libations, chanting in low voices. When the river priest spoke again, his tone was final. "The river will not forgive. It will not release its anger until she is returned to it in the way of the ancestors. The gods demand her life." The words struck like a physical blow. Her life. Her blood for the rivers. Back in her family compound, Ekemma sat in the dark, staring at the floor. Her mother's face was pale and wet with tears. Her father paced silently, his fist clenching and unclenching. No one spoke of resistance. No one dared question the gods. Only Obi refused to accept it. He came to her that night, his voice urgent. "We can leave. Tonight. Before they come for you." She looked at him, her heart aching. "And where will we go? The river does not end here. It flows beyond the hills, beyond the forest. You cannot outrun a god." His eyes searched hers. "I would rather die running with you than watch them take you." Her throat tightened. But she knew the truth, there was no escaping what had been set in motion. The next morning, the sickness claimed another child. The river ran redder than before. By nightfall, the decision was made. The sacrifice would take place in 3 days. Ekemma spent those days in a haze of quiet dread. She walked through the village slowly, memorizing the sound of the market drums, the smell of roasting yam, the sight of the sun dipping behind the hills. She avoided the river. She could not bear to look at it. But on the night before the sacrifice, she went there one last time. The moonlight shimmered on the surface, hiding the red beneath. She thought of her childhood, the games, the blessings, the songs the women sang to the water. It felt like a different lifetime. Obi found her there. They stood together without speaking, the sound of the current filling the silence. Finally, he took her face in his hands. "I will not let them do this to you," he said. "I swear it." She leaned into his touch, memorizing the warmth of his palms. "I swear," she whispered back, "that no matter what happens tomorrow, I will carry you in my heart. Always." It was their last promise. A dangerous promise. And the river heard it. The morning of the sacrifice came too quickly. The air was heavy, the sky a dull grey as though even the sun refused to shine on what was about to happen. The village was silent. No songs, no laughter, not even the usual call of roosters. Ekemma rose before dawn. Her mother dressed her in a white wrapper, the same one she had worn as a child during blessings at the river. Her father stood in the corner, his jaw tight, his hands clenched. He could not meet her eyes. The priest arrived with 2 attendants. They carried a calabash of white chalk and a small wooden staff carved with river symbols. Without a word, they marked her forehead and both shoulders with the chalk. "It is time," the priest said quietly. The villagers gathered at the riverbank. Men, women, and children stood in a wide circle, their faces pale and tense. No one cheered. No one clapped. This was not a festival. This was a funeral before death. Ekemma walked slowly, her bare feet sinking slightly into the damp earth. Every step felt heavier than the last. She could hear the river before she saw it, the low, steady rush of water moving over stones. When she reached the center, the priest raised his staff. The chanting began. It was deep and rhythmic, rising and falling like the waves. They called on the spirit of the river to see, to hear, to accept what was offered. Obi stood at the back of the crowd, his chest rising and falling rapidly. He had spent the night pacing, torn between reason and desperation. He had promised he would not let this happen. But what could one man do against the will of an entire village, against the will of a god? Still, as the chanting grew louder, something inside him snapped. He stepped forward, pushing through the crowd until he stood just a few paces from her. "Stop," he shouted. All eyes turned to him. "This is wrong. She has done nothing to deserve this. If the river demands a life, take mine instead." The priest's eyes narrowed. "The river does not want your life. It wants hers. She is the one who broke the bond." Obi's voice cracked with desperation. "Then let me go with her." But the elders moved quickly, pulling him back before he could reach her. The crowd closed around him, their voices harsh with fear. "You will bring more curses if you interfere," someone hissed. Ekemma met his eyes over the heads of the villagers. Her gaze was calm, almost peaceful. It was as if she had already accepted what he could not. The priest stepped forward, standing at the edge of the river. He raised his staff again, and the chanting reached its peak. "Great Spirit of the water," he called, "we return to you what is yours. Accept her and bring peace back to your people." 2 attendants moved toward Ekemma. They placed a garland of river leaves around her neck and guided her closer to the water's edge. The river's surface shimmered strangely, though there was no wind. It was as if the water itself was waiting. The knife appeared, a broad, flat blade with a carved wooden handle. It had been kept in the shrine for generations, used only for sacrifices demanded by the gods. It caught the weak sunlight, flashing briefly before the priest lifted it high. Obi's voice broke through the chanting. Ekemma. She turned to him one last time. Her lips moved, though her voice was lost beneath the rhythm of the drums and chants. But he knew what she was saying. I love you. The priest's movements were quick, practiced. The blade descended. The crowd gasped as her body fell forward, the white cloth blooming red beneath her. The attendants caught her, lowering her gently before lifting her again. Without hesitation, they stepped into the shallows and laid her in the river. The water took her instantly, pulling her beneath the surface as though she had always belonged there. For a brief moment, the red around her spread across the water, swirling and dissolving into the current. Then, silence. The chanting stopped. The wind stilled. The river, still tinged with red, began to clear before their eyes. The strange taste faded. Somewhere downstream, fish broke the surface again, flashing silver in the sunlight that finally pierced the clouds. The sickness would pass. The hunger would end. The gods had been satisfied. But Obi was not. He stood frozen, the sound of the river filling his ears until it was all he could hear. His hands were clenched so tightly they ached, but he felt nothing. The world around him was a blur, the movement of the villagers, the murmurs of relief, the shifting of feet in the mud. In his heart, there was only a hollow space where her presence had been. That night, the village held no celebration. The people were relieved, but they knew the price that had been paid. Fires burned low in the hearts, and no drums sounded. The air felt heavy, as though the river's hunger had left behind a shadow. Obi went to the water's edge alone. The moon's reflection trembled on the surface, broken by gentle ripples. He knelt and let his fingers touch the water. It was cool, clear, alive once more. But all he could see in its depths was her face, the way she had looked that last moment, not afraid, but full of love. The elders would tell the story for generations. They would speak of the time the river turned to blood and the brave woman whose life restored the village. But Obi knew the truth was more than that. It was a story of love, fierce, defiant, and doomed from the start. A love that had dared to challenge the will of the gods, and paid the price in full. And sometimes, late at night, when the river was calm and the stars hung low, Obi thought he could hear her voice in the water. Soft, gentle, calling his name.